In today's video, we're going to be breaking down Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. Where do we think he goes in the NFL draft? What are his strengths and weaknesses? How is he best utilized? And finally, where should we be taking him in fantasy drafts this next season? And what might we be able to expect out of him? Watch to the end of this video and you'll have a good idea. Egbuka is listed at 6'1", 205 pounds. I think both the height and the weight are reasonably accurate. Think JSN in terms of his build, but potentially just a little bit taller. As far as his age goes, he's 22 years and 2 months old, and so he isn't the youngest prospect, but that's because he is a senior, not a true junior like a lot of these prospects are going to be. In terms of his production, well, he went to Ohio State, so as you could imagine, especially with the string of talented wide receivers they've had the past couple of years, it's quite difficult to get on the field as a true freshman, despite what Jeremiah Smith is doing. And so, as a true freshman, on 10 targets, he went 9 for 191 and 0. Very solid production considering the low amount of targets. But then as a true sophomore, he definitely stepped it up. He had 106 targets, 74 receptions, 1,151 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns, en route to an 84.0 PFF receiving grade. That is a beautiful sophomore collegiate season. Obviously, if he had been able to get onto the field a little bit more as a true freshman, the jump wouldn't look quite as substantial as it does here. But nonetheless, that is fantastic production as a true sophomore. Now, we get into his true junior season. As you can see, everything dipped. He had 60 targets, 41 receptions, 514 receiving yards, and only 4 touchdowns, with a PFF receiving grade of 75.2. He did miss some time, so these counting stats aren't really fair when you compare them to a full collegiate season like he had in 2022. But that is going to be something about his profile, his injuries. That is something that we're going to want to consider with him. But he did choose to return as a senior, and I do think that's going to help his draft capital. And if we've learned anything from this previous draft class, it's that the wide receivers were incredible. I do think the injury would have hurt his draft capital, and I think in what is a much weaker receiver class especially, that he is probably going to be a first-round prospect, or at the very least on that fringe. And so as his true senior, he had 100 targets, 75 receptions, 947 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns, with a PFF receiving grade of 82.9. And so this profile, in terms of the production, is a little bit wonky. We prefer substantial growth year after year, but due to injury and a definite QB downgrade, especially in 2023 from what he had with CJ Stroud in 2022, that just isn't going to be what we see with Egbuka. Looking at some advanced stats, among draft-eligible FBS wide receivers with at least 75 targets, that was a sample size of 84 here. Egbuka ran 378 routes, which is 95.2% of the team routes, and so we like the total participation here. Now, when we take a look at his utilization, specifically where he's deployed, he plays 80.1% of the time in the slot, at least this season, and 17.4% out wide. And so he's generally a slot player, and I do think that when we get into the grades later, that I think that's going to be the best way to use him at the NFL level, and it was at the collegiate level as well. In terms of his yards per out run, his 2.51 are 21st in the sample size. But I will say, while Jeremiah Smith isn't included in the sample size, having a true freshman that's just so dominant is just going to hurt your statistics. And so I think that if he didn't have such what will be, in my opinion, a legendary prospect already on his team, plus with a substantial quarterback downgrade from CJ Stroud to what he had, that number would be a little bit higher. But it's still a fine number. In terms of his PFF receiving grade, his 82.9 is 13th. I do think that he's better than the 13th best prospect among the wide receivers, but I think the grade in general is relatively fair. In terms of his yak per reception, his 5.8 is 33rd in the sample size. It really isn't a major strength of his, but if he's in the open field, he can get it done. His missed tackles forced of 8 are tied for 52nd. He's not really the make-you-miss wide receiver, but if you give him a straight line, he's definitely going to get some yards after catch. Looking at his contested catch percentage, his 59.1% is solid, 13 out of 22 this season. And so he does have very good hands, especially in traffic. And if you're going to be a slot wide receiver, that's a necessity. As far as his targets go, his 100 were 32nd in the sample size. His 75 receptions were 19th. And so that means he was relatively efficient with his targets. His yards of 947 were 25th. Like I said, not a deep burner, more of a chain mover type of wide receiver. And his 10 touchdowns were tied for 6th. And so overall, I think these statistics point to him being a very good slot wide receiver that is really good before the catch, but probably not the best after the catch. Further breaking down how he performs versus man and zone, at least this past season, his PFF grade versus man of 84.4 was 12th in this sample size, and so that's very, very good. His yards per out run versus man of 2.64 tied for 41st, though. Like I said, the competition in which he's playing with and the quarterback play are a big reason for that. His PFF grade versus zone of 77.3 is 25th, and his yards per out run versus zone of 2.19 is good for tied for 56th. And so I do think that he's a better man beater than a zone beater, but I think he's quite good in zone coverage as well. So I don't think that either one of these are going to be a weakness for him at the NFL level. He can absolutely exploit the holes in the zone. He knows where to sit down. He's a very savvy route runner. He knows how to use leverage to his advantage. So I don't have any concerns there. His PFF grade on screens of 81.1 is 34th in the sample size. Like I said earlier, he isn't really the best yards after catch guy. If it's available, he's going to get it, but he's definitely not the best in terms of yards after catch. His PFF grade in the slot of 83.6 is 20th. I do think that he's best in the slot, potentially as a Z, probably not an X. And his first downs caught of 47 are tied for 14th. And getting to his grades, remember that he's give or take 6'1", 205 pounds. I think that is reasonably accurate. He is a senior, and while we do prefer true juniors, it's definitely understandable given his injury that he decided to return. And I don't think it's going to hurt his draft capital. I think in terms of my valuation, I think he's worthy of a mid to late first round pick. But you might notice the 5 out of 5 projected draft capital. I do think that he's going to be a mid first round wide receiver in terms of his actual draft capital. My comparison for him is that he's a faster Jackson Smith and Jigba in terms of his maximum speed, but with less route running prowess than JSN displayed. JSN was one of the best route runners I've ever seen as a collegiate prospect, especially his understanding of leverage. It's second to none, and at least in my opinion. My official grade for him is an 83.5 out of 100, which is a good receiving prospect. I think that, and I don't mean that to be insulting to him, I think he's a very talented player, and I think that the analytics and the positional versatility are what hurt him here the most. In terms of his short route running, 5 out of 5. He is adept at the shallow cross. He runs a very good slant route, a speed out, a hitch. No worries there. In terms of his medium route running, he has one of the best dig routes I've seen in this class. Very good. And that's a staple of modern NFL offenses. And so he is going to be an asset over the middle of the field. He also runs a pretty good 10-yard out as well. And as far as his deep route running, I gave him a 5 out of 5. And now this is in the context of him in the slot and as a Z. I don't think he's going to be an X because he does struggle at times to stack vertically in a straight line. He doesn't have that ridiculous long speed, but he runs a very good slot fade. He runs a good deep over. And so I don't think that running routes deep is going to be an issue for him. I think it's going to necessitate more horizontal route running than straight linear vertical route running for him to win at least. As far as his double moves, I didn't really see a ton on film, but due to his agility and change of direction, which you see below, I have no issues with his potential for double moves. As far as his releases go, I gave him a 4 out of 5. From the slot, he has no issues separating essentially immediately, getting off the line of scrimmage. No issues there in terms of off coverage. But in terms of facing press man coverage, I don't think he's going to be able to do that very well at the NFL level. And so I think that he's best used as a slot or potentially a Z wide receiver. As far as his speed, I gave him a 7 out of 10. So once he really does get going for a while, he does have the speed to take it the distance if somebody gives him a good block or if he has a really good angle. But he doesn't have that true angle-destroying long speed. Now, in terms of his acceleration, I gave him an 8.5 out of 10. I do think he gets to his speed rather quickly, and especially this is before the catch. He is quite bursty off the line of scrimmage. In terms of his deceleration, I gave him a 4 out of 5. His snap down is quite good. I think that someone like Malik Neighbors is a little bit better, but it's still really, really good. His agility and change of direction, this is really more so seen before the catch. His ability to change directions in his route running and be precise with his footwork is really, really good. And so I don't see any issues there, but it doesn't quite translate to after the catch per se. And so in terms of his catching and catch in traffic, I give him straight 5 out of 5s. He hardly drops the ball ever if the target rather, is remotely accurate. And he's very good in contested catch situations, which where I project him for in the NFL, the slot, is going to be an absolute necessity. In terms of his run after catch, it's not that he is terrible after the catch per se, but he doesn't really juke people out of their shoes. He does a relatively good job of maximizing yardage in a straight line, but I don't think he's nearly as good as JSN was after the catch. As far as his dog factor is concerned, I gave him a 4 out of 5. It's not that he isn't willing to be physical. He can be very physical in the run game. He tries to break tackles, but I don't think that he is going to really be breaking very many tackles at the NFL level. But he is a relatively aggressive player, and he is not he's not afraid rather to let a defender have it if he makes a catch over him. His analytics, I gave him a 6 out of 10. He only had one receiving season of over 1,000 receiving yards as a true sophomore. But I think the context of where he's playing, being Ohio State, the QB regression after CJ Stroud, and this year playing with Jeremiah Smith, I really think it would be unfair to have him much lower because I think he made the most of what he could. In terms of his projected draft capital, straight 5 out of 5, no issue there whatsoever. I think he's going to be a mid-first round pick, like I said earlier. And in terms of his XZ and slot ability, I think that he's going to be a very good slot. I think he's going to be an above average Z, but I don't think that he can really be an X. I think that the physical press man coverage and his lack of long speed and ability to stack vertically is going to hinder his ability to be an X. And as far as my worries, can he stay healthy and can he play outside at the NFL level? I think with the outside, once again, it's more so I don't think that he's going to be an X, but I do think that he can play offline a scrimmage as a Z. But overall, once again, while I don't think that he's quite the prospect that some of these other guys have been, I think that he's a very, very good prospect. And as far as fantasy is concerned, this guy could be a PPR monster. I think in a full PPR, he's going to be at his best. And if you happen to play in a standard format, he would be a lot lower because I do think he profiles in terms of his on-field play and what I think his role is going to be as a Jackson Smith and Jigba type of player. And so where does Egbuka rank among his contemporaries in 2025 and the 2024 class? Well, once again, Neighbors is the only elite prospect in terms of how they've scored in my model so far in 2 seasons. You have your Harrisons, your McMillans, Odunzes, BTJs, and Luther Burdens that comprise the great receiver tier. And I think Egbuka is a very good receiver prospect. And so I have him in the A.D. Mitchell and McConkey tier. With A.D. Mitchell, remember that it was his elite separation ability, especially vertically, and the fact that he was the 5th most athletic wide receiver since 1987 that really helped his profile, despite his lack of production. And with Ladd McConkey, despite his lack of production as well, he was an incredible route runner. His use of leverage was impeccable, very good release package, and like Egbuka, had a little bit of limited positional versatility in that I don't think that he's the best X, but I do think that you can use McConkey there. But with Egbuka, I really don't think that he's going to be an X at the NFL level, but I do think that he's going to be a quite good slot receiver and a Z. And so remember, he's 6'1", 205 pounds, give or take. He's a true senior. My valuation of him is that he's worthy of a mid to late first round pick this season. And my comparison for him is a slightly faster JSN with less route running prowess. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Major Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster, buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks.